El Salvador legitimately elected Nayib Bukele as president, but he embarked on this massive effort to simply round up people that he thought were gang members and put them in prison. No trial, no judicial process to find out whether they're actually guilty or not. And as a result, like 10% of the, young men in the country are now sitting in prison. And it's been quite successful in reducing the level of gang violence in El Salvador by like 90%.
And meanwhile, his approval ratings are also something like 90%, right?
That's right.
Why? I mean, looking at this one in particular, and I remember, of course, when he came on board, he was well known for that and for being a crypto tech bro. That the latter hasn't worked out so well. But why? I mean, when this problem is so persistent through so many administrations across the political spectrum, why does it take a strong man who doesn't care about democracy to do anything about it?
Well, look, what he's done is not that different from Duterte in the Philippines. What the rule of law does is it puts constraints on the use of, among other things, police power. And so Bukele has been putting these gang members in jail. In Salvador, it's a little bit easier because the gang members all have these tattoos that pretty clearly identify them as members of gangs. So they just round up anybody with a tattoo and stick them in jail. There's no court proceeding. And in the process, they arrest a lot of innocent people. And in Duterte's case, he killed a lot of innocent people because he basically told his police to go shoot and ask questions later. And so, unfortunately, we have a presidential candidate in this country that wants to do something similar to deal with shoplifting and crime in the United States. So I think that, in a liberal democracy, we deliberately constrain power. That's what makes a liberal democracy liberal rather than just a, populist majoritarian democracy. But it does mean that there are certain things that we don't permit ourselves to do in the area of security and other things.
And I mean, at the same time, when the basic provision of human security, whether it's enough food to eat or freedom from gang violence, is not provided by the government, I mean, I don't care what kind of a political system you're living in, common sense tells you should revolt against that system.
Well, that's right. I think in the end, there's a good reason why the government, a legitimate government, should have a monopoly of force. There's some cases that are actually more successful, like Colombia had this huge problem in the 1990s with Pablo Escobar, and you had, the FARC, this left-wing insurgency. You had militias on the right that were battling it out in the streets. And, essentially what that country did is to strengthen its central institutions, the army, the national police. They haven't solved the drug problem, but they severely reduced the level of violence. And they did it not like Bukele by violating people's rights on a massive scale. There were violations, but, they did it while still remaining a liberal democracy. So I think that it's not impossible for democracies to cope with these kinds of situations. What you do not want is for people to take, coercion into their own hands and hire, their own militias in order to protect their properties and their families, because down that road you basically just have that's Somalia or Lebanon.
So, I mean, there's a good chance, right? I mean, that after they've arrested all the thugs, that for decades, El Salvador will never have a representative government again. If this guy decides that he's going to do whatever he wants on corruption, on basic economic services and the rest, the people are going to they'll have no method to address that.
Well, this is an age-old problem of authoritarian government. The Chinese have this story about good emperors and bad emperors. But what's happened in Chinese history is that you get good emperors on occasion, but more often you get bad emperors. And when you get a bad emperor, then you're really in trouble because you don't have any institutional constraints, and that bad emperor can do an incredible amount of damage, and there's really no way of stopping him until, basically they die physically. And that was, I think, the problem with Mao Zedong. I think he was the last really bad emperor. We'll have to see about Xi Jinping. He's not looking so good either, but certainly Mao Zedong launched, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution that were unbelievable catastrophes for the society. And because you're relying basically on the goodwill of one individual, your chances of getting good outcomes at the other end over an extended period of time are low.